12.1 Planned Procurement Management. Planned procurement management is a process of documenting project procurement decisions, specifying the approach, and identifying potential sellers. The key benefit of this process is that it determines whether to acquire goods and services from outside the project, and if so, what to acquire as well as how and when to acquire it. Goods and services may be procured from other parts of the performing organisation or from external sources. This process is performed once or at predetermined points in the project. That's from PMBOK Guide, page 466. Procurement and procurement-related activities are required early in the project, and so it's necessary, or at least very advisable, to begin defining roles and responsibilities related to procurement in the planned procurement management process. The project manager should ensure that the project team is staffed with procurement expertise and legal expertise to the level required for the project. And this is particularly important if the project will involve procuring something that is out of the company's usual area of expertise, or if procuring from another country. I have found this difficult in some projects because the procurement personnel, and especially the legal personnel, often resent being asked basically if they have the expertise, the knowledge and the experience. It tends to be taken negatively, i.e. they seem to feel that they're being accused of being novices or incompetent, but it needs to be done because I have seen major procurements go badly wrong in areas that should have been foreseeable, but it turned out that the procurement and or legal team did not have the necessary experience. The way around it that I developed, and it appears to work, is to invite them to a project meeting, present the project and the deliverables, highlight the procurements and contracts, then ask open-ended questions asking for their advice. If you have some procurement and legal knowledge, which you should as a project manager, you will quickly spot who is bluffing, or just as bad, someone who clearly doesn't know that they don't know. I ask further questions just to make sure, but I don't challenge them in an open forum, and then I discuss it privately with the sponsor or the other senior manager. The PMBOK Guide lists typical steps for procurement as: prepare the procurement statement of work, the SOW, in or terms of reference, the TOR. Prepare a high-level cost estimate to determine the budget. Advertise the opportunity. Identify a short list of qualified sellers. Prepare and issue bid documents. Prepare and submit proposals to the seller. Conduct a technical evaluation of the proposals, including quality. Perform a cost evaluation of the proposals. Prepare the final combined quality and cost evaluation to select the winning proposal. And finalise negotiations and sign a contract between the buyer and the seller. Let's have a look at the planned procurement management inputs. Input number 1 is the project charter. And this contains the objectives, the project description, summary milestones, and the pre-approved financial resources. Number 2, business documents. Just remember that there are 33 project documents on the project, but there's just 2 business documents. And in the examination, you have to remember that the project manager will use and update the project documents, but the project manager will also use the business documents, but will not update the business documents. The project manager does not have the authority to update business documents. So what are these mysterious business documents? The first one's a business case. It's important that the business case remains valid, and so you need to ensure that your procurement strategy supports it. The benefits management plan is the other business document. This describes when specific project benefits are expected to be available, which will drive the procurement process to enhance the probability that the benefits, which are expected to be harvested during the life of the project, will be delivered by those dates. Typically, many benefits will not be realised until after the project has ended, sometimes months later, and so there will be less pressure on the procurement process. Input number 3, project management plan. Components we're looking at here are the scope management plan, because that describes how the scope of work by the contractors will be managed through the execution phase of the project. A quality management plan that contains the applicable industry standards and codes that the project is required to follow. This information is used in bidding documents such as the RFP, request for procurement, and will eventually be referred to in the contract. You will need to perform due diligence on the supplier to ensure that they have the experience in these areas and they and their staff hold any required certifications. Resource management plan. This defines the resources to be purchased or leased, along with any assumptions or constraints that would influence the procurement. Assumptions may include that the materials will be delivered to site and that the delivery quantity and timing will conform to your schedule. A constraint may be that the supplier has to agree to a buy local policy or that the work cannot be offshored. Scope baseline, that contains the scope statement, the work breakdown structure baseline and the work breakdown structure dictionary. Early in the project scope may still be evolving. The elements of the scope that are known are used to develop the statement of work and the terms of reference. And as I mentioned before, that some people get a bit confused because you're thinking, I'll work through the PMBOK guide, we're now on to chapter 12, we're near the end of the project, so how come we don't know, we're still developing things? And it's because that all of the processes in PMBOK, you'll be going through them many times, and you'll be going through this particular one right at the start of the project, all the way through it and at the end. So at the very first time you use it, things are still evolving, lots of stuff have to be determined. Input number 4, project documents. The project documents that can be considered as inputs for this process include the milestone list. This is the list of major milestones, and that shows when the sellers are required to deliver the results. And in case you're wondering why the milestone list is used instead of the project schedule, it's because firstly the project schedule can be huge and you won't be able to see the forest for trees. Secondly, the milestone list exists long before the project schedule has been created, and it enables some procurement planning to begin early in the project. In unusual circumstances, it is possible for some procurement to occur before the project has been initiated. The circumstances where a major deliverable has an extremely long lead time. In Australia, for example, railway carriages have to be ordered around 5 years in advance. The reason is simply that there's only one company in Australia that manufactures them. There is limited demand, as you can expect, for railway carriages, and they're bought by government really, and it's tied to the buy local policy, which forbids importing them from overseas. And so the railway carriage company has no incentive to increase production. But it means that if the project is to build or extend a railway track, and you've planned to start in 3 to 4 years' time, you need to be procuring the railway carriages now before you've even started the planning proper on your project. Project team assignments. These contain information on the skills and abilities of the project team and their ability to support the procurement activities. You will need to consider adding resources or providing training courses if the skills are lacking. The requirements documentation, which would include technical requirements that the seller is required to satisfy, and requirements with contractual and legal implications that may include health, safety, security, performance, environmental, insurance, intellectual property rights, equal employment opportunity, licenses, permits, and other non-technical requirements. Requirements traceability matrix. This links the product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. Resource requirements. These contain information on specific needs such as team and physical resources that may need to be acquired. Risk register. This provides a list of the risks along with the results of risks analysis, the risk response planning, and some risks are transferred via a procurement agreement. And as we've seen in project risk management, that outsourcing is a major way to transfer risk. There is a growing trend to assign specific risks to the buyer and seller in a contract. Two important points to remember are that you can't transfer all risks to the seller, and the seller can't accept risks over which they have no control, i.e. external risks. Stakeholder register. This provides details about the project participants and their interests in the project, including regulatory agencies, contracting personnel and legal personnel. Input number 5, enterprise environmental factors, would be marketplace conditions, obviously, products, services and results that are available in the marketplace. This would be used for your make or buy decisions, and this may even be on your organisation or department's catalogue. Sellers, including their past performance or reputation, this is usually referred to as doing due diligence on a seller. Typical terms and conditions for products, services and results for the specific industry. Unique local requirements such as regulatory requirements for local labour or sellers. For example, in Australia, I'm sure many other countries are the same, they have a buy local policy, which means that if an Australian provider can do the work, then they will be given preference even if their cost estimate is higher than from overseas. They also have a preferred seller, and a seller can't be considered unless they are on the preferred seller list. Legal advice regarding procurements, contract management systems, including procedures for contract change control, establish multi-tier supplier systems of pre-qualified sellers based on prior experience, and financial accounting and contract payment system. Input number 6, organisational process assets. The various types of contractual agreements used by the organisation can influence decisions for the planned procurement management process. The organisational process assets that can influence the planned procurement management process would include pre-approved seller lists, formal procurement policies, procedures and guidelines. If formal policies, procedures and guidelines don't exist for the organisation, then it's up to the project team to devise and perform them, as I have done. Contract types. All legal contractual relationships generally fall into one of two broad families, either fixed price or cost reimbursable. Also, there's a third hybrid type commonly used called time and materials contract. The most popular contract type in use are discussed below as discrete types, but in practice it is not unusual to combine one or more types into a single procurement. This is from the PMBOK guide, pages 471-472, starting with fixed price contracts. This category of contracts involves setting a fixed total price for a defined product, service or result to be provided. This is best suited to off-the-shelf products or highly predictable products which can be ordered from a catalogue. However, in the PMBOK guide, fixed price doesn't necessarily mean that the price is fixed. They define two fixed price contract types. The first is a genuinely fixed price contract, referred to as firm fixed price, FFP contract. Buyers love these, which is why they're the most popular, because they throw all the risks onto the seller. That's all the risks that the seller can accept. But the problem with firm fixed price contracts is that if the seller is behind in the work, there's little incentive to continue because they've got a fixed price they can't earn anymore, and they may work for others instead to bring some money in. To try to get around this problem, the seller tries to prove that outstanding work is actually scope creep and that the buyer should pay more. But the PMBOK guide also defines a fixed price contract, which isn't actually fixed price because it includes a bonus which is called Fixed Price Incentive Fee, FPIF. This one offers financial incentives if the seller can complete the project sooner, cheaper, with increased technical performance. Unlike the FPIF contracts, a fixed ceiling is set and all costs above the price ceiling are the responsibility of the seller. And so you can eventually run into a similar problem as with the firm fixed price contract. When the seller is no longer entitled to bonuses and there's work outstanding, then we're back to the fixed price. Fixed price with economic price adjustments. I won't read the acronym, they get too long. This type is used whenever the seller's performance period spans a considerable number of years or if the payments are made in a different currency. It is a fixed price contract but with a special provision allowing for predefined final adjustments to the contract price due to change conditions such as inflation changes or cost increases or decreases for specific commodities and changes in exchange rates. Cost reimbursable contracts. This is an odd one. The seller charges a fixed fee, which is the actual profit. But on top of this fee, the seller charges all their actual costs. So they might charge $50,000, that's the fixed fee part, that's their profit, plus their actual direct costs, such as hourly cost of staff and staff travelling expenses, plus their actual indirect costs, such as office rent, power and water. This type should be used if the scope of work is expected to change significantly during the execution of the contract, but it now means that the buyer is picking up a lot of the risk. Variations in cost reimbursable contracts can include cost plus fixed fee. The seller is reimbursed for all allowable costs for performing the contract work and receives a fixed fee payment calculated as a percentage of the initial estimated project costs. Fee amounts do not change unless the project scope changes. Cost plus incentive fee. Is your head beginning to spin around yet? The seller is reimbursed for all allowable costs for performing the contract work and receives a predetermined incentive fee based on achieving certain performance objectives as set out in the contract. In cost plus incentive fee contracts, if the final costs are less or greater than the original estimated costs, then both the buyer and the seller share costs from the departures based on a pre-negotiated cost-sharing formula, for example 80-20 split, 70-30 split, 60-40, whatever, over under target costs based on the actual performance of the seller. Cost plus award fee. The seller is reimbursed for all legitimate costs, but the majority of the fee is earned based on the satisfaction of certain broad-based performance criteria that are defined and incorporated into the contract. The determination of the fee is based solely on the subjective determination of seller performance by the buyer and is generally not subject to appeals. So, as you can imagine, this type of contract is not popular with sellers. Time and material contracts, which everybody in the entire world except the PMBOK calls time and materials contracts, but time and material for the exam. When an exam question mentions hybrid in relation to contracts, it's usually a time and materials contract. They are a hybrid or a combination of cost reimbursable and fixed price contracts. One of the most common uses is to acquire expert resources, when it's not possible to determine in advance exactly what they will be doing, how long the period of employment might be, and so on. In fact, part of the first period of the expert resources work contract could be to help elaborate the scope of the work that they have to do. It reminds me of one job I was interviewed for. I got the job and I said, could I see my job description? I haven't actually seen one yet. And my boss said, drop a job description and submit it to me. If I'm happy with it, I'll sign it. So, time and material contracts are usually for relatively short-term contracts by no contractors who have been employed this way to one company for 8 to 10 years. And at the time of recording this video, they're still employed and still earning contractor rates, so they're quite happy. Plan procurement management tools and techniques. Tools and techniques number 1, any guesses? Yes, expert judgment. Well done. Expertise should be considered from individuals or groups with specialised knowledge or training in the following topics: procurement and purchasing, of course, contract types and contract documents, of course, and regulations and compliance topics. You might even hire an expert judge with time and materials contract. Not that judges go around giving advice for money, but you can get an expert who can provide expert judgment. Techniques number 2, data gathering. Techniques that can be used for this process include market research to examine the industry and specific seller capabilities. PMI also expects you to research sellers online and in conferences so that you can profile their reputation and capabilities. If this buying sounds a little weird to you, you have to remember the PMI perspective. This is a huge project and a contract may be worth millions of dollars. Tools and techniques number 3, data analysis. For example, a make or buy analysis is used to determine whether work or deliverables can best be accomplished by the project team or should be purchased from outside sources. Making instead of buying should be done with extreme care, otherwise the organisation could be spread too thin and have to bear the risk of overloading staff and creating multiple external dependencies between projects. The key message is just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. And if making instead of buying would involve the company learning new skills, employing expert staff, your risks are even higher. My advice is run away from any such suggestions. Make or buy analysis may use payback period, return on investment, internal rate of return, discounted cash flow, net present value, benefit cost analysis, or other techniques in order to decide whether to include something as part of the project or purchase it externally. Tools and techniques number 4, source selection analysis. You're going to be running a competitive process for a product, service or result. Then you need to decide on a ranking for the individual attributes. For example, you may acquire a storage shed to be built with hardwood frames on a concrete foundation and covered in exterior grade plywood and painted grey. If nobody cares what wood is used for the framework as long as it is hardwood, then the ranking for hardwood will be low. If nobody cares what shade of grey is used, as long as it's one of the 40 that's available, then it too would be ranked low. But if the shed is to be used by the Navy, for example, then the shade of grey is probably critical and will be ranked very highly. As you will recall, PMI thinks you're working on enormous procurements for massive projects. As a result, the sellers will be investing huge dollars to compete in this process, and so to be fair to them, you need to let all sellers know how you're ranking the criteria. Other commonly used selection methods include the least cost. Naturally, this will work only when the product is extremely well defined and well established practices and standards exist, or if it's an off-the-shelf product and so large variations in costs can't be justified. Qualifications only. The qualifications we are considering here means how well the seller is qualified to deliver the product, i.e. we're considering their reputation, and this is used mainly on small value procurements. Quality-based / highest technical proposal score. The selected firm is asked to submit a proposal with both technical and cost details and is then invited to negotiate the contract if the technical proposal proves acceptable. Using this method, technical proposals are first evaluated using the quality of the technical solution offered. The seller who submitted the highest ranking technical proposal is selected if their financial proposal can be negotiated and accepted. Quality and cost-based. The quality and cost-based method allows cost to be included as a factor if the seller selection process. In general, when risk and/or uncertainty are greater for the project, quality should be a key element when compared with cost. Sole source. This means you have only one possible supplier. The buyer asks a specific seller to prepare technical and financial proposals, which are then negotiated. Fixed budget. When my wife and I were young, we were touring Europe, and one night we were in Verona in Italy, and we were hungry but we had almost no money. We went to a small cafe and I pulled out a handful of coins and said to the waiter, "What can you give me for this?" And we actually got a very nice pizza each. Fixed budget is similar to calling waiters from different cafes together, holding out a bundle of money and saying, "What can you give me for this?" and choosing the best. Solution techniques number 5, meetings. After you've done your research on your potential bidders, you need to meet with them to see how you can move forward. And this enables buyer and seller to negotiate a mutually beneficial approach. And in these meetings, you can also decide if a suitable method for managing and monitoring the procurement. Plan procurement management outputs. Output number 1 is a procurement management plan, of course. This contains the activities to be undertaken during the procurement process. It should document whether international competitive bidding, national competitive bidding, local bidding, etc. should be done. If the project is financed externally, the sources and availability of the funding should be aligned with the procurement management plan and project schedule. The procurement management plan can include guidance for how procurement will be coordinated with other project aspects, such as project schedule development and control processes. Make sure that you allow for lead times, public and religious holidays and festivals. Check the resource calendars and make sure the people and equipment will be available when you require them. The timetable of key procurement activities. Procurement metrics to be used to manage projects. For example, the contract could have milestones, performance targets, audits and so on. Stakeholder roles and responsibilities related to procurement, including authority and constraints of the project team when the performing organisation has a procurement department. And an organisation, I can't tell you which one, procured a data centre that they didn't need for around $40 million. And they have to pay several $1,000,000 each year for the next 12 years to maintain the data center that they don't need. The contracts were signed by internal contractors who each had a spending authorization limit of $5,000, but nobody checked, and the organization is legally compelled to pay the contract. This is the sort of thing that can go wrong when you have a weak procurement system. Constraints and assumptions that could affect planned procurements. The legal jurisdiction and the currency in which payments will be made. In this case, where the buyer and seller are in different countries or even different states, they may agree to contract disputes being governed by the legal jurisdiction of another country or state so that neither has a legal advantage of the other. Determination of whether independent estimates will be used and whether they're needed as evaluation criteria. This can be of real value when you've little experience with procuring similar products, services or results, and there are very few sellers and you are concerned that they may be colluding together to make the price higher. Risk management issues including identifying requirements for performance bonds or insurance contracts to mitigate some forms of project risk, and pre-qualified sellers, if any, to be used. A procurement management plan can be formal or informal, can be highly detailed or broadly framed and based upon the needs of each project. Or to put it another way, you need to tailor the procurement management plan to suit the project. Output number 2, procurement strategy. Once the make or buy analysis is complete and the decision to make the decision is made to acquire from outside the project, a procurement strategy should be identified. The objective of the procurement strategy is to determine the project delivery method, the type of legally binding agreements, and how the procurement will advance through the procurement phases. Delivery method. In the PMBOK Guide, page 476, it says, delivery methods are different for professional services versus construction projects. For professional services, delivery methods include buyer services provider with no subcontracting, buyer services provider with subcontracting allowed, joint venture between buyer and services provider, and buyer services provider acts as the representative. For industrial or commercial construction, project delivery methods include turnkey, design build, design bid build, design build operate, build own operate transfer and others. Contract payment types, and this would be on any contract types that we've already discussed, and different contract types may be used with different products in the same project, of course. Procurement phases. The procurement strategy can also include information on procurement phases. Information may include sequencing or phasing of the procurement, a description of each phase and the specific objectives to each phase. Procurement performance indicators and milestones to be used in monitoring. Criteria for moving from phase to phase. Monitoring and evaluation plan for tracking procurement, and process for a knowledge transfer for use in subsequent phases. Output number 3 is the bid documents. When you're hoping to procure something, you need to create a document to define what you want in detail. How much detail? The simple answer is sufficient detail for the prospective sellers to be able to produce reliable quotes. Specific procurement terminology used may vary by industry and location of the procurement. Depending on the goods or services needed, the bidding documents can include a request for information, request for quotation, request for proposal, or other appropriate procurement documents. Please note in the exam, terms such as bid, tender, or quotation are generally used when the seller's selection decision is based on price, or when buying commercial or standard items. A term such as proposal is generally used when other considerations such as technical capability or technical approach are most important. Terms of reference is sometimes used when contracting for services. Output number 4, procurement statement of work. The statement of work, or SHA, for each procurement is developed from the project scope baseline and defines only the portion of the project scope that is included within the related contract. The SOW describes the procurement item in sufficient detail to allow prospective sellers to determine if they're capable of providing the products, services and results. Sufficient detail can vary based on the nature of the items, the needs of the buyer, or the expected contract form. But the statement of work can be revised as it moves through the procurement process until it is incorporated into a signed agreement. Output number 5, source selection criteria. In choosing evaluation criteria, the buyer seeks to ensure that the proposal selected will offer the best quality for the services required. The source selection criteria may include capability and capacity, product cost and life cycle cost. Life cycle means really to the end of the product, not just to the end of the project. Delivery dates, technical expertise and approach, specific relevant experience, that should be pretty high. Adequacy of the proposed approach and work plan in responding to the statement of work. Key staff's qualifications, availability and competence. Financial stability of the firm. Management experience and suitability of the knowledge transfer program, including training. Output number 6, make or buy decisions. A make or buy analysis results in a decision as to whether particular work can best be accomplished by the project team or needs to be purchased from outside resources. As I said earlier, you don't have to make something just because you can make something. Output number 7, independent cost estimates. Significant differences in cost estimates can be an indication that the procurement statement of work was in fact deficient or ambiguous, or that the prospective sellers either misunderstood or failed to respond fully to the procurement statement of work. For some reason, the PMBOK guide ignores the elephant in the room, i.e. that some of the sellers may simply be overcharging. There can be another problem when the price is too low. It may be an inexperienced seller, or they're inexperienced in the area, or they're willing to take a loss on the contract and in the hope of getting more work. This is not a good deal for either the buyer or the seller because of the risks involved. You don't want to be paying people to be learning how to do something that you actually delivered and matching a particular quality. Output number 8, change requests. A decision that involves procuring goods, services or resources may require a change request. Other decisions during procurement planning can also create the need for additional change requests. Changes to the project management plan, its subsidiary plans and other components may result in change requests that impact procurement change. Change requests are processed for review and action through the Perform integrated change control process. There are a lot of outputs with this process. Output number 9, project document updates. The documents that may be updated would be the lessons learned register, the milestone list, the requirements documentation. Requirement documentation may include technical requirements that the seller is required to satisfy, and requirements with contractual and legal obligations that might include health and safety, security, performance, environmental issues, insurance, intellectual property rights, equal employment opportunity, licenses, permits, certificates, and as well as other non-technical requirements. Requirements, traceability matrix, and the risk register. Each approved seller comes with its own unique set of risks depending on the seller's organisation, the duration of the contract, the external environment, the project delivery method, the type of contracting vehicle chosen, the final agreement based upon price. Stakeholder register. The stakeholder register is updated with any additional information on stakeholders, particularly regulatory agencies, contracting personnel and legal personnel. Output number 10, organisational process assets updates, and the organisational process assets that are updated as a result of the planned procurement's management process would be really the qualified sellers. Table 12.1 on page 481 of the PMBOK guide is a representative list of common types of documents used in the procurement and some of their content. Please learn this list. You will need this list to answer several questions on the exam. Absolutely guaranteed. Please learn this list. That brings us to the end of planned procurement management, thankfully. It was a long lesson, and that indicates that it's also important. The next lesson is 12.2, Conduct Procurements. Please read the corresponding chapter in the PMBOK guide before watching the video.